Everybody, this is Dean Smith from the community of human and organizational learning, and welcome to our monthly webinar. I'm just letting everybody in from the waiting room, so this is my little bit of dead air space filler here as I make sure we get everybody in, and it looks like everybody is in. So welcome to our monthly webinar. I'm thrilled, thrilled that you're taking the time out of your calendar, out of your daily activities to join us for our monthly webinar. Even more thrilled to have Brian Hughes, the Senior Vice President and co-founder of Sologic, with us to share some very interesting insights, the tales from a time-traveling know-it-all, but really the thinking about connecting, and Brian, correct me if I'm wrong here, connecting all the different disciplines, if you will, within this community, but also how we leverage, the present moment and really make a difference. So with all that, Brian, thrilled to introduce you.
Okay, thanks, Dean, and thanks everybody, and thanks to the community for having me. I love doing presentations for this group of people. I learn so much from my interaction with HPRCT before, and now the community of human and organizational learning, which I think is a neat new rebrand that you guys went through. So I am just very appreciative to be here with you all. My name is Brian Hughes. I am a Senior Vice President at Sologic, and I have been doing mostly focused on root cause analysis for the past 22 years. We started Sologic in about 2011, and before that I was with Apollo, so I don't know if those words mean anything to you, but I guess the takeaway is that this has pretty much been my life since 2000, and I took my first root cause analysis course back in 1996 when I was working in accounting, corporate accounting for an insurance company. So I've been pretty much on this journey for a long time. And so I guess I'll just sort of round out the thanks by saying that this community is a place where I feel really fortunate to belong and to contribute. And I've learned so much. And I use these presentations to this group to kind of push my own boundaries a bit. So this is the first time I've given this talk. And so if there's a little squeak in the hinges, though, you'll know where that comes from. But I'm very passionate about this subject. I've always been really interested about it, and I'll get into that just a little bit later on. So let's go ahead and I'll just walk through I was going to walk through the agenda, but first things first, thank yous. These folks that are on here, these are people that I have spoken with directly. A lot of what I did a presentation recently at ASSE 2021 down in Austin. And this is a lot of the stuff that I'm rolling into. This was also the result of interviews that I conducted for that. So some of the folks that are on here are folks that I interviewed for that presentation that I also just learned so much from, that I've rolled directly into this one. And then others are names that you're going to be familiar with because they're longtime members of the community. People that I'm just so grateful to have in my professional life, some of them even personal. So I want to say thanks to everybody on the list. I would say that if you like anything out of what happens today, maybe I played a small part in that, but these folks deserve the credit for being willing to spend time with me. So I want to acknowledge that. And learning is kind of the subject of the webinar this morning. So I learned from them. I'm relaying what I learned to you. And so now hopefully we can kind of continue that cycle, which has to do with time, which we'll get into in a minute. Also, I got a couple of dog pics because why the hell not? I've got Cassie on the left. That's Jessica from the community. I posted in LinkedIn yesterday, kind of a final reminder, to snag in a few last participants. And I said, hey, by the way, give me a picture of your dog and I'll post it in the webinar. Well, there's Cassie, and that's her charge. I don't know who, I'm assuming that's Jessica's daughter. And then we got my little poochie Carmen on the right. I see John Boisino from our group is on here. I should have put Roxy on, John's dog. I love dogs. I think dogs are an important part of our lives. And so in the grand scheme of it, part of who we are and part of what comes out of presentations like this are due to my relationship with dogs, because I just love them. So there you go. So on to the stuff. So I want to talk first about the background. I'm going to go into a little bit about why this topic, why do I think this makes a good subject and all of that good stuff. I also want to talk a bit about time and how does one travel through it, right? Because the title, a time traveling know-it-all. And by the way, I want to just put the disclaimer out there right now. I'm not saying that I know it all. In fact, far from it. It's a collective know-it-all that I'm trying to put out there. And it's more of an aspirational know-it-all. And I want to really explore the way that we learn as we progress through time, and how time is that common denominator between all the disciplines in the community. So that relates to this next one. How does time relate to the community of human and organizational learning? All of you and all of the folks that do what we do. I also want to bring an example scenario into the conversation, because it's one thing to sort of stand up and throw these theoretical darts at the wall, and isn't that neat and isn't that interesting, but I also really appreciate seeing kind of where the rubber meets the road. Okay, because it's one thing for a consultant or a university person or whomever to sit there and type up some kind of neat structure and really polish it, and then come up with this framework and put it out there and present it in a way that's compelling. But really, at the end of the day, it doesn't mean anything to the folks at the sharp end, the folks that are actually on the job. And so I really like, I mean, obviously it's a cycle again, where you think you learn, but you got to take it out there and apply it, plan, do, check, act, and all of that stuff. So I'm going to bring an example scenario in, and of course, questions and comments throughout. Dean told me I have all the time in the world, but I'm planning, here's my target. I'm planning on 45 minutes of talking stuff, slides, and all of that. I'd really like to reserve, 15 minutes at the end for questions and comments. I might run a little long. At the same time, I would encourage you to use the chat function to go ahead and ask your questions along the way. Dean's going to help those. He's like the catcher here. He's going to catch and let me know, because I'm a little too ADD to to watch everything all at once. I'm in. Oh, as Jake, I'm going to screw Jake's last name up, but he's a guy I learn a lot from too. Jake Mazowitz. Jake Mazowitz. Jeez. Anyway, I did my best. I saw a webinar from Jake recently talking about the difference between focusing and scanning, and how it's really difficult to do both at once. Well, I'm in focus mode, so the scanning is going to be tough. So I need my buddy Dean to help be in the scan mode to help me catch the stuff that's maybe going to blow past me. All right.
I'm right there with you, Brian.
Thanks, buddy. And Dean, you can just weigh in anytime. I like the back and forth, so don't feel like you're going to interrupt me. All right. So let's talk background. Why this topic? Okay, so I've been a part of this community for, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years. So not a long time. Some folks have been around well, it's been a thing for a really long time. And I so wish that I had gotten involved in it so much earlier in my career, but we are where we are. And let's go back to the HPRCT days. Human performance, root cause, trending. Well, then where do the resiliency engineer people come in, right? So my first year, it was a big push towards resiliency engineering. And then where do any of these other disciplines and focus areas and all that stuff, how do any of those things fit? But so the bottom line is, I walked away feeling like these things were siloed. You have your smart people in each of the different areas, all saying really smart things, but I didn't feel personally like, wow, there's no connection between these things. And there ought to be, because maybe if you zoom out and you abstract out just a little bit, that we're all talking about the same thing, so it's one of those sort of Zoom things where you're able to zoom in on the details, which are extremely important, but then also zoom out and remember what the big picture is. And so that's what this is an attempt to do, is my own attempt to zoom out, see the big picture based upon what I've learned, which is not going to be right. Well, I shouldn't say that. It's not going to be complete, but then to share it with you folks and get the conversation going so that we can hopefully improve that. You might think, why did I pick the title? I just liked the title. I thought it was fun. So in any case, but time certainly has something to do with it. Now, normally I would show this a picture for new clients, like who do we work with at Sologic, and you know, we look at how all the different companies and industries that we work in, which is true, and I love the job because of it. And so we work in all of these different areas. But let's not talk about us for a minute. Let's just talk about the community. Who are the different industries that we serve? Where are the different industries that we come from? And this slide doesn't even come close to representing that, right? There's a big bunch of different industries, people doing different things that can utilize what this community brings. And that's true for industry, but it's also true for discipline, right? So you cut it a different way. Safety people, quality assurance people, reliability and maintenance, operations, IT, supply chain, customer service, audit and accounting, and all the other stuff that I'm leaving out. Right. So when you cut that either by industry or when you cut those up by discipline, just serious problems everywhere, right? Well, that's what we're in the business of doing. That's Sologic. That's what we're in the business of doing. But, you know, the community is a broader scope than just what we focus on. And so the community is also, I think, is perfectly relevant for who we are and who we serve. Just a quick flash at our John Boisino, who's on the call. He's our VP of product. So he runs all of our software development efforts and all that other stuff. But he gave me a new name for this. It's called the logo quilt. Anyway, we work with all these different companies, and we work with more than this, but you know, whatever, you can only fit so many on a page. And I'm grateful. I mean, I can't even tell you how grateful I am that these folks have confidence in us to spend a little money. But the takeaway here is that there is not a single company on this logo quilt or your own, for those of you that are consultants that have similar looking slides, that wouldn't benefit from what that abstracted offerings are of the community, right? So just sort of putting a sharp focus on exactly what the scale is of what it is, the potential that we as a group have to bring. And so I'm going to call this slide Wild Estimates and Bad Math. What do you think, Dean? Think I'm going to build credibility with this one?
Yeah, I think the door is wide open there.
I've really left myself now. Yeah, dude. So here's the deal. At Sologic, we think about our current available market. Okay, well, who is that? Well, we globally, because we have a global reach. I don't know what the answer is, and I don't know that. I mean, maybe some other people do too, but we don't, like, people don't publicly report who spends money on the kind of stuff that we do. But so, just for lack of any like concrete evidence, we think of our current available market as about 200,000 people. Well, what does that mean? Well, that means people that spend money with companies like Sologic, or companies like, you know, like the folks that are maybe on the call, or people that play a role in the community. We don't train anywhere near 200,000 people a year, right? So we've got a sliver of that. But if you add it all up, you know, maybe it's smaller than that, maybe it's bigger than that. But, you know, it's not a million. I don't think. I think 1 million is too big, and maybe 100,000 is too small. So for what it's worth, you know, so then what that means is that that's kind of the pool that we're all playing in terms of, well, I want to grow Sologic's market share. Okay, great. Well, am I only after those 200,000 people, or is there something bigger? Because all of us always talk about the fact that that what we do serves a much broader potential market, right? So I want to get an idea. This is not to scale. The 200,000 would be like a grapefruit, right, to the earth. When we got 7.8 billion people. Now, certainly not all of those people are potential customers or people that would spend any kind of money, but more of what I'm looking at here are the people that would benefit from the kinds of problem-solving skills that this group brings together. And so what I feel like is that we're reaching a very small number, and there's potentially a very large number. And what I've always thought, and I mean, I totally believe it, is that this community, when we do these annual conferences, like the one that's coming up in Colorado Springs next June, which I highly encourage anyone on the call to go to, because we're going and we're fun, but you're going to learn a lot. You're going to become part of that community, and I think you're going to get a lot out of it. But you know, so you know, there's always several hundred people there, but I don't know why that conference isn't 5,000, 10,000 people, right? Because there are so many out there that benefit from what it is we do. And I have a feeling that if we're good about honing and focusing and learning and targeting our message, that we're going to be able to reach a much broader audience. By the way, so 7.8, this math actually works, but it's based on horrible assumptions. But 7.8 billion divided by 200,000, that's 39,000 days. So just to think about it, like, let's just say that you could train all those people, 200,000 people a day, whereas I was thinking about a year over here, that'd take you 39,000 days, or about 106 years to consume all that. So, the thing is that, I mean, obviously we want to grow. And we want, but what I want from this is, I want this community to grow, because if the community grows, we all grow together, right? So, and we all have this common goal, and this is the way that I wrote it. This is one of those things that's subjective, right? So again, not me being right, but me just learning and listening and then processing. I think that we could all get behind that. We are in the business of providing sustainable, repeatable, successful outcomes in the presence of uncertainty. Okay, so that the bottom note is really interesting, and that uncertainty is the X factor that makes it difficult. I think that sustainable, repeatable, successful outcomes, I think who doesn't want that? I want that in everything in my life, But it's that presence of uncertainty that causes fits. Yeah. I was just talking with Dean a little bit about mountain biking. He and we share this biking thing. And, but what I didn't tell you, Dean, was that I had a rear brake failure on my mountain bike. And I thought that it was simple, replace the pads. Well, I replaced the pads, it still doesn't work. And I'm like, oh, geez. So then I order up a new brake. I thought it was just the lever, the piston and the lever. I replaced the piston and still doesn't work. I'm like, oh, geez, I guess it must be the caliper. I replaced the caliper, thing still doesn't work. The only thing left is the tube in between, right? So it's this uncertainty and by the way, I use biking examples because that's where I get my maintenance, my hands dirty maintenance experience, but it's just one example of how uncertainty wreaks havoc on our lives and makes it really difficult for us to achieve this goal.
Hey, Brian, let's pause there for a second if we can. Because I'm just, so uncertainty, it is such a huge word. I mean, it's only here's some bad math for you. Count them real quick. That's 10 letters. But it's a huge word. It's got personal implications. It's got organizational implications. And it stops us in our tracks. Yeah. But why? Because we know it's there all the time.
We do. It's weird to say that uncertainty is a constant.
Yeah.
Right, isn't it?
Yeah.
But we know this, and we say it in different ways all the time. Error is normal. This is one of the key, like the number one thing that you're going to hear in a Bob Edwards or Todd Conklin presentation, or Andrea Baker, these folks, or James Newman, etc. Error is normal. Well, error is that's usually associated with people. People are highly variable. Variation and uncertainty are the same thing. And risk and variation, risk is really just a measurement of variation or a measurement of uncertainty. And so we're going to talk about that in a little bit. Uncertainty itself is a constant, but the degree of uncertainty, that's the harder part of it. And when you have a larger number of possible outcomes, not all of which are bad, by the way, not all of which are bad, then you have that greater degree of uncertainty. And so then, like, recognizing that it's there, yeah, that's great. That's perfect. That's like saying, it's raining outside, but how do I prepare for that? That's the next question. And that's really something that I think a lot of the folks that play a role in the community address in various successful ways. How do they characterize that uncertainty with some degree of confidence? And then how does that allow them to act in the present moment in order to either hedge against that uncertainty or to reduce the level of uncertainty so that you can make a more accurate decision, so that you can hopefully come up with a more successful, more repeatable outcome, So I thank you for that. It's an interesting, there's so many tangents on all of this stuff. It's a big subject. But let's talk about time for a minute. So as I was researching time, there's all these questions out there that all the philosophers, some of them some of them you don't, but a lot smarter than me, like questioning, does time even exist, right? Is it linear or is it cyclical? In other words, linear, like a football game, like a Seahawks game that comes down to losing by two field goals. Oh my goodness. Anyway, tough season for us this year, but there's still only 60 minutes, although they do manage to drag 60 minutes out into about 3 hours. But cyclical, meaning like the sun is coming up. I see it out the window right now. Well, guess what? That's like more of a cyclical sort of perspective on time. Is it endless or is it finite? Right? So, you know, wait a minute. When did it begin? Did it begin? I don't know. None of us were there. Will it end? Well, in a way, it's finite to those like to the living. It begins when you first open your eyes and you can process the world around you, and then it ends when you close them again. Maybe so, or maybe, who freaking knows, right? So there's some big questions here. Some people have posited that the time depends on the motion of objects, that if everything were to suddenly freeze, that time would be irrelevant or maybe not exist at all. And then relative or absolute, is time relative or absolute? And certainly the perception of time, as Einstein has shown, is relative, but is there some absolute form of it? And is it subjective or objective? Right, so like right now, some of you who are kind of in the same headspace as me and maybe Dean are like, man, this webinar is great. Others are like, what the hell, man, you're dragging along, and I wanted to get to the meat of this, right? So all of these kinds of questions come up around time, but the one thing that I found that was really useful, a definition that I thought was really helpful in the context of this talk, is that time is an intuition that, along with space, allows us to comprehend sensory experience. Time and space are elements of a systematic mental framework. And I think that really rung true for me, in that regardless of all those other questions, it's useful to us. And it's useful to us because it lets us put the sensory experiences that we have as we progress through time into some semblance of order that makes sense. Right. And so I thought that was one that was pretty interesting, because, you know, it really kind of ties into the notion that time and space, for that matter, right? So, and we can't really separate those things, because it doesn't really make sense to talk about time without space, and it doesn't really make sense to talk about space without time. So those two things kind of go together. And time and space, what that allows us to do with that last definition is to tell us what we are, where we are, and when we are, but not how and not why we are. Right? So think about that for a minute. A lot of the inquiry, the thoughtful and useful inquiry that goes on inside this community is about answering the how or the why things are what they are, where they are, when they are. Right? So think about that for a minute. And that's what we bring to this, is that bottom question. It helps ask, not just, you know, yeah, that's what it is. Here's your cup of coffee, okay? And where is it? Well, it's in my basement on my stand-up desk that you can't see off camera. And when is it there? Well, it's, you know, it's 7:56 a.m. in the morning, right? So, but how did it get there? And why is it there? And all of those are important questions. And it really sort of brings up the concept of the past. The heritage of the past is the seed that brings forward the harvest of the future. I really liked that quote. That means that the things that we do, the things that we're experiencing today, such as this coffee sitting here, is the result of something that I did earlier today, which is walk the dog to the coffee shop, right? Here's another one. Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. I'm sure you've heard versions of this before, and I just think that that's really, really smart. But you know, it's the opposite of this, which I thought is also true. Those who learn from the past are able to repeat it, and so this is bringing time into what it is that we all do. If we want to be successful, sustainable, repeatable outcomes in the presence of uncertainty, we have to decide, first off, what do I or we want my or our future to look like? So we need to envision what we want that future to be, right? I envisioned a cup of espresso on my desk as I gave this presentation this morning, right? So, all right, well, if that's my future that I like, all right, well, then what steps do we need to take in order to get there? And that question really comes down to what Dean was talking about before, which is, well, then if I know where I want to go and I have an idea of what those steps are, then what should we be doing? What should I be doing right now? Like, what is that very next step? And with something simple like a cup of coffee, well, you don't really have to think about that too much. With something complicated like building the 787 airplane, or standing up at Amazon Fulfillment Center, you know, or developing an electric automobile, you know, it gets a little bit more complex. It's not as certain at that point. Right, so that sort of brings us around to the utility of time, and the utility of time in the context of what the community does. And so I have been using a version of this graph for a long time, but it really helps me organize my thoughts. The difference between the past and the present has everything to do with certainty. So the past is certain. Whether you know what it is or not, there's uncertainty about your knowledge of the past and your the clarity and the completeness of your understanding of the past. Certainly that none of us have a complete picture on that, but that does not mean that it did not happen. It did. When a tree falls in the woods, it does make noise, even if no one is there to perceive it. So there is a certainty involved with the past. And you'll notice that I've expressed that in the form of probability. If the past is, the events that happened in the past have a probability of 1.0. But the future is uncertain. And I like to represent that, at least in my mind, as a cone of possibility that expands the farther out from now that we get. In other words, there are more possible outcomes a year from now than there are 10 minutes from now, right? Now, there's a probable line down the middle. That's probably what's going to happen. That's what I mean by probability. But that doesn't mean that things don't come out of left field. And as I learned from Mr. Todd Conklin, if you think about this, this is sort of a version of the pyramid, Heinrich's pyramid, where you have near misses on the bottom, or unsafe acts lead to near misses, lead to first aid, lead to injuries, lead to lost time, lead to fatality. That's really the wrong way to interpret that pyramid. Well, that's not true. Any event that could potentially happen to somebody, it may result in an unsafe act, or it may result in a near miss, but some of those things have a lot of legs, and they could actually, it could have been for, just luck, or just the organization, or the combination of various causes and things. Maybe it could have been a fatality, right? So it isn't that, I think that Heinrich's pyramid applied to this cone of probability. You understand that even if something is on the edge case, like Russell Wilson throwing an interception during the Super Bowl against the Patriots at the very last second, that was just such an edge case, but it wasn't out here in the darkness, and just because something is improbable does not mean that its probability won't collapse to 1 at the point of the present. So that's the difference between the present, the past, and the future. The future has probability of less than 1, good, bad, and otherwise. The past it did occur, and the present is where all possibilities collapse to that probability of 1, and we're forever rushing forward into it. All right, so all of that, I don't think I could say much more about that, but why is that useful to us right now? Well, because right here is where we can act. This red line in the middle is the only place where we can take action. I can't undo what was done. I can't do what is yet to be, right? So I can only take action right now. But in trying to make that determination, all of us travel, believe it or not, forwards in time, and we also travel backwards in time. We travel forwards in time when we imagine these prototypical outcomes, when we imagine these prototypical futures, and we try them on. And we know that there's a lot of different ones, and we pick the one hopefully that we like the best, and then we try to steer towards that. And in that moment, we're in that moment of success, or that moment of a positive future. or if we're dreading an outcome, which we often, I don't know if like you all, you know, given a certain bit of information, sometimes we tend to go to the worst possible outcome or the worst case scenario. You know, again, we're living in a future that is yet to manifest and may never manifest. And so, you know, but at the same time, in that moment, you are in that point, that prototypical future, right? You're traveling through time. And then we also travel backwards. We look backwards all the time. We think about that thing we did yesterday that we're really happy with, or that thing we did yesterday that we don't like so much and that we're going to learn from it. Here, I decided to pull this up. This is a picture of my band. I'm 16 years old, by the way. You probably can't tell which one is me, but that's me on the bass. And my buddy Rick and my buddy Greg. Rick, I stay in touch with. Greg fell off the face of the planet. This is 1986, my first band. And the thing is that right now, that picture, I remember the day that picture was taken. I remember the guy that took it. I know every detail of this drum set because I helped tear it down and build it up a whole bunch of different times. I know what that counterweight feels like, and I know what that word says, even though you can't read it. I know what this garage smells like. I'm back there right now, 35 years ago. And in fact, I thought it'd be fun. I actually still have the bass. Here it is right here. Huh? Little different, little worse for wear. Same thing though. You know, it's got a, it's seen a lot of miles. But it's sort of interesting, isn't it? Because, you know, there's, when you think about how things persist and then how things don't. I mean, look how different I am. I've gone through a lot of changes. My base is essentially the same, a little bit different, but the decay over time, some things persist much longer into the future. And the reason that I'm pulling this up is that, yeah, we travel in time all the time. We do it all the time. In fact, we don't often live right in the present, right? But then some things that happened in the past are more likely to be the same or similar in the future, while other things, there's a lot more variation associated with them. A lot of times the other things that are associated with more uncertainty are us, the people, the things that we interact with, the systems and the tools, those are much more persistent, like my base, right? So hopefully that works for you guys.
Hey,
so,
Brian.
Yes, sir.
I'm going to jump in there because so love the base, love the picture, but it sort of just triggers something in my mind. And there were some chats in the chat box that allude to this, you know, that sometimes our memories of the past can be something other than what actually happened, you know, so for sure, that's, you know, that happens. What's the implication there though, for the present moment? And then also our vision for how we want things to come. Does that matter at all if we're really solid and objective about what's going on at the present moment? Or
you know, it's like it's true that our memories aren't they're not reliable. You know, is it like that vision that I just had of standing in that garage and playing that music? You know, I feel like it's so clear, but then would I even know if I were missing certain details? And you know, in incident investigation, when we go back and we're interviewing people about what happened and when it happened and how it happened, you know, how much faith do you put? I mean, I often think that people are telling me as much of the truth as they possibly can. You know, I do my best to set up conditions that don't cause them, like they don't have disincentives to participate openly, honestly, completely. You know, we get rid of discipline, we get rid of not pointing the finger and all those kinds of things. So we try to take that sort of externality out of it. But then what about the quality of their memory? You know, and all of that. So yeah, you know, I think that you have to take that. We're kind of delving into evidence quality. You know, I would say that the subject of what evidence you can rely on and what evidence you can't. And what I would say to that is that, yeah, memories are faulty. That's sort of a constant with respect to people. Another constant / variable, constant source of variation. But then at the same time, what we do to sort of account for or to accommodate for that is we diversify, meaning I want to hear another story from somebody else about the same event, and then I want to cross-reference those things. Or I want to maybe look for evidence that might have been recorded, or evidence that's a little more concrete and a lot more objective that can help corroborate what that person said. You know, so when we're just remembering our band from high school, that's different. I actually, though, here, check this out. I got to walk off camera for a minute. But where are you?
Are you getting the drum kit?
No, I'll be right back. I got it here. I actually found this. I was moving my dad out the other day. That's a tape from that era.
Okay.
And that's an objective piece of evidence. And I'm looking forward to digitizing that because frankly, I don't have a tape player in the house anymore. So but I would say that we can accommodate that, and we can hedge against that. First, we have to be aware of it, that that memories are faulty. And so when it counts that we're relying on a memory, when it really counts, well, then we're going to look for some way to corroborate that and to diversify the sources of that information so that we can have more confidence. You reduce the uncertainty of I guess, the uncertainty of certainty.
Got it. Thank you.
How's that?
That's good. Perfect. Thank you.
Sweet. So, the thing is that we learn over time, and we learn based on our experiences and those of others. And we're always learning, adjusting. And in fact, I think it was Bob Edwards, who I'm extremely grateful to. I think he's a super smart guy, and I really, I've been to a few of his presentations, and we've interacted outside of his classes, just really learn a lot from him and appreciate the way that he thinks about things. But that we really need to fail in order to progress. And most of the time, the vast majority of the time, failure doesn't hurt us or kill us. But it allows us the opportunity to learn. And if we can sort of make learning faster, easier, and better, then we're going to learn more. And when you think about this, in fact, the presentation I gave to HPRCT a couple of years ago talked about complexity, how complexity is increasing exponentially, and how and the impact of that on our workspaces. And then also, and why that makes what we do so important and increasingly important is because of that exponential increase in complexity. That complexity is making it really important for us to accommodate the way in which we learn. That's what we all do. But we can only act in the present. So what should we be doing right now? And that is the question. And so it's around all of that that I actually, I started this as a PowerPoint diagram. And obviously this is well above my design skills. I sent it over to a design group that we work with and said, hey, can you try to put all of this stuff together into one place? And kind of around the timeline as a central, and around the present as a central feature. And that's where, like, looking backwards, and some might disagree with this. I'm not saying this is right, and I can change it, right? But in my mind, root cause analysis is looking backwards and trying to understand how something happened. I put learning teams over here too, because again, disagree with me if you want, but learning teams are a sort of even if there wasn't some event, one single event that you're looking at learning about, it's just it's a less structured and different way at examining our journey so far, and then trying to decide, well, how does that what can we learn from that in the present that's going to change the way that we act, or the way the systems that we operate, and all of that. Right? So trending and data visualization, this is stuff that is so important, especially to us in the present. Now, it may be looking backwards at what happened, and it might actually be pretty good at projecting forwards, but we're consuming it right here in order to make better decisions, right? To have, and when I think about things like condition monitoring, I do a lot of work with Amazon. Man, they can tell me from their phone what the bearing on motor A123, the temperature profile has been over the past 25 days in any site in any part of the world, so that sort of thing is it useful? Yeah, it is, frankly. I put human organizational performance and resiliency engineering kind of right here in the present too, although it's sort of a soup. I like the resiliency engineering around making sure that we're coming up with good solutions or corrective actions or preventive actions, right? So whether you're looking backwards in making that determination, or whether you're looking forwards and putting those mitigations in place, I think that it fits nicely around the present. And a lot of the human performance stuff that I've learned from smart guys like James Newman, I just think that a lot of that has to do with how we're managing ourselves and our teams right here in the present. And then when you get over into the world of uncertainty, that's where we're doing things like FMEA, where we're imagining as accurately as we can how a particular process or piece of machinery could fail. Things like risk management, identifying risks, trying to quantify them or put a boundary around them, determining, are we going to invest? Because every investment that you make out here, and in fact, every investment that you make here in the present is always about controlling, reducing uncertainty in the future. So you're always making a bet on risk, right? So all of this, I really liked, this helped me organize it in my head. And then I cleaned it up a bit past my limited PowerPoint capabilities. But I see this as a, at least a step along the way towards providing a single roadmap for what this community provides. And it's all around time, right? It's all around time. That's a common denominator there. So kind of fun, happy to share. One of the things that we all do is when we're learning through a group of diverse, from a diverse team of people. And that's because these problems, however we define problems, are amorphous. They're not easily defined by boundaries, shapes, and borders. And that's why a diverse team of people is so important. We're trying to identify people with a diverse perspective on the problem such that we can cover as much of it as we can. As I was putting this presentation together, I recognized that's kind of what this community does too, right? So if you were to abstract it up, not a single problem, but problems, then a lot of us, we cover different aspects of it, but together we cover more of it. And, to kind of crystallize what it is that the point of value that this community brings to everybody else. Right? So I kind of like this idea. But in doing this, it brings up the nature of facilitation. I'm going to use that word, meaning a person who leads a group like this through some kind of a learning experience, whether that's an RCA, whether that's an FMEA, whether that's a learning team, whatever. If you get a group of people together, someone's got to drive the bus. And I always think of it like I need to kind of start a fire, amongst the people to create cultivate, or to what's the word, to create a substrate that is conducive to sharing and learning and growing, not insulated, closed, or inward focused, but to open up so that we can share, because otherwise we're just these silos, right? And then if it works out great, it looks like this. You're like, gosh, I got short-haired hippie dude with the guitar singing and playing. Maybe he's good, maybe he sucks, but you don't care. You're drinking your beer over here, you got the conversation, you got some food, you got the warmth and all of that. This is a great facilitation for me. I've learned to love doing things like FMEAs when we're all learning together. But you got to be really careful, because if you let it get away from you, it looks more like this. And it's like the whole thing is burning down. You're like, I got to get control of this, this situation. And the more complex the problem and the more that's at stake and the stronger the personalities that you got in the group, this is a real, you got to always be wondering, am I going to let this get out of control? And so one of the things that we bring to the table is the ability to manage the complexity involved in organizational learning, okay? So facilitation, it needs to be balanced out with also analysis. The goal of any sort of facilitation or structured learning environment is to cultivate the possibility for learning, to create that space that's safe, that's inclusive. And leading that team can feel very chaotic. That's because there is a lot of information, and a lot of us, we're not going to just be able to hold it all in our heads when there's a lot of stuff coming at us, right? So I'm not talking about just walking down the street to get some coffee. I'm talking about how do we keep this fulfillment center up and running after startup. I'm talking about, how do we get this airplane out the door, this new design? These kinds of things are bigger. And they're really difficult. And in fact, I would say it's you pass the point of being useful if you try to hold all of that or keep all of that in your heads. The bottom line is we need to build these reconciled mental models of the people on the team, so that when you walk in there, maybe you are just bringing your own little box of goodies, but at the end of it, it's like leaving a potluck. You've had a little bit of everything, and you understand what the complete meal is like. you understand exactly, you've learned from everybody else, and you have a much more complete picture of what it is. And my point here is that standard processes and tools help do this. And the reason that they help is just like when you hear somebody say that, you know, safety isn't the absence of incidents, but the capacity to fail safely. Well, standardized process and tools, like the kinds of things that we provide, builds facilitation capacity. It builds the capacity for that facilitator, and that's the person I'm focusing on right now, to actually facilitate in as effective a way as possible. And to put this all into perspective, this is the way an organization learns. And this is all coming back to, what are we supposed to be doing right now? Well, how can we best learn? Because that is going to help tell us what the best way is. I'm real thankful to my buddy, Katya Jakob, formerly of Boeing, for turning me on to this. This is a wreck, I get it, but it's this Sinophin, or Sinophin, I don't know how to pronounce it, framework. And you know, the thing is like obvious things. This is where you don't have to think about it too much. You know, this world is pretty straightforward and easy. That's like me getting my coffee. Complicated, these are things, you know, there's a lot of moving parts here, but you know, like building a house, for instance, or building a building. Yeah, there's a lot that's going on, but it's well defined, it's well organized, and it's something that you can plan for. But complex, that's a little different. And this, I think, is what I've heard Todd Conklin say in the past. This is the world that a lot of us are in these days, simply because of the increasing complexity of our world. So it's not as easy to just sort of map everything out and plan everything out to step 1, step 2, step 3. It's more like you got to play more of a heads up game. And you need, in order to do that, and now again, I'm still speaking from the perspective of a facilitator, okay? When you're in these environments dealing with complex problems, well, then it's not as easy to map out step 1, step 2, step 3, follow the dotted line, and you will get to the end. In fact, my own facilitation experience has, I have to sometimes throw my plan out the window entirely. And I have to either wing it, which is a little bit nerve-wracking, but also exhilarating, or I have to have more tools. And that's why I like this community, is because I have more tools having been a part of this, because the problems that I'm working on are complex. They're not just complicated, they're complex. And that means that the facilitation environment is complex. And that means that, you know, it's a lot, I guess what I'm trying to say is that I got to come prepared pretty much for anything. It's like a hike in the Cascade Mountains in the fall. Is it going to be sunny? Is it going to be rainy? Is it going to hail on me? Is it going to snow? Is it going to be the most beautiful experience I ever had? I don't know, but I better come ready. And I better know how to act in the moment, right? And so the community is what gives facilitators this sort of ability to compete or to play in the complex field in which we find ourselves. And to be honest, you know, Sologic, we do our best to incorporate all of these things, but we're just one player in this, you know. I mean, without all of us together, I guess what I would say is that what all of us together, from my own personal experience, I'm just so much stronger in this environment. I'm a better leader of complex investigations as a result of my interactions with these groups, with this group. And I think that that's something that's not just true for me, that's true for everybody, right? So what works best? Root cause analysis, human organizational performance, learning teams, resiliency engineering, FMEA risk management, training and data visualization, some other thing, right? The truth is that we have to be prepared in all of these different areas. And we need to bring more of everything into our training classes. I know it's hard, you know, we don't want to overload. We only have a certain amount of time with our people, you know, but there is so much common ground between what it is that we do. And there's strength through diversification, and the complexity requires depth, agility, all of that. And so that requires the problem solver, the professional problem solver of today, to just be able to do more, but thankfully more is available. So, hey, I borrowed this from Bob Edwards' slide deck. Bob he's always been just so gracious about helping me, answering questions, getting on the phone, just giving me the slide deck, etc. And what I like about this is a couple of things. This is a screen capture, it's not his deck. but so over here, you'll see that he talks about a traditional approach. Look for one root cause through some kind of Fivewise investigation. I would say that Fivewise gets a bad rap, not undeservedly. I mean, it's real simplistic, but I think the problem with Fivewise is that it was never meant to do what people use it for. I mean, originally it was meant just like for production workers on the floor at Toyota to just not just break, fix, but break, think, fix. It's easy to say, hey, do you think about what the antecedents are to the break, you know, and by understanding what those are, does that help you come up with a better fix? But this will never work on something complex. This is something that might get you on the board. It's not that it's not useful. It's just that it's often misapplied. But I love this. When I saw Bob pull this up, he's like, you know, we got to go beyond that because, you know, events happen as a result of combinations of lots of different things. And some of those things are a little bit nebulous or aren't easily defined, like resource constraints. Well, what does that mean specifically? System strengths. Well, what does that mean? That's a big thing. And so Bob's point was, look, you know, events that occur are Bob's point through my interpretation. I'm not speaking for him, but you know, it's a soup of stuff that plays in, and this isn't really conducive to that, which I completely agree with. Right. So I wanted to use this as a point where, you know, and I would say too, that any of the root cause people that you're going to experience or you're going to interact with at the community, no one's going to just show up and say, well, Fivewise, and that's the root cause. None of us say that. None of us believe that. We all recognize that it's something that looks like this. So there's a lot of commonality there. I put Bob's email address here in case you don't have it. It's hop_coach@outlook.com, and I would encourage you to reach out to Bob, take his classes because he's fantastic. What I'd like to do is I'm looking at the time. Please, am I okay, Dean? Or are we?
Oh yeah, you're fine. You're fine.
Okay, buddy. Okay, well, so I'll just kind of keep progressing here. What I want to do is take something simple like spilled water, because I'm going to jump into an example here. But I kind of need you to know, while I say that I kind of lump root cause analysis together in one bullet point, but there's a lot of different flavors of it. I know mine the best. That doesn't mean mine is the best. It means that it is what it is, and that's the world that I'm in. And we take an event like this and we logically break it down. So we start with spilled water, which we call the focal point. We call that any problem that we're focusing on. So whatever it happens to be. And then we look at, obviously you have to tip over the container in order to get the water to spill. But every time you tip a container over, it doesn't result in spilled water. And that means that there must be something else going on. And this is us breaking away from that linearity of 5 whys. This tipping the container and water in the container, and frankly, an opening at the top of the container. You really need all three of these things to result in spilled water. This is an approximation, okay? So the one thing about, it's a model, and the model is one of those ways in which I find value because it helps me manage the complexity of an adverse event. I usually focus people around what is the problem that we're trying to solve, or are we working on multiple things at once? That's really important from the very beginning. But once your team has a reconciled view of what the problem is, then I find a structured logical model like this very useful at both extracting information from the group and organizing information into a model that makes sense. I stole this quote from Mr. Conklin: workers don't cause failures, they trigger them. That's right. In fact, a worker tipped the container. Usually it's a person that would do this. All right, but is that the cause? I would say that that is a cause, but also water being in the container and an opening at the top. These are equally important because the event can't happen without all of these. So to kind of put a finer point on this, yes, what Bob says here is true. Events aren't the result of single causes. The events are the result of multiple causes working together. And with that in mind, what I'm going to do is jump out of the PowerPoint presentation, and I'm going to jump over to, oh boy, look at, it's going to force me to log in. Okay. By the way, I can't recommend a password manager more. I love my password manager. I'm gonna dive over here into COSLink, which is our app for doing RCA. I'm not going to show you the features or anything. I just need the chart, and the chart's big here so I can dive in. So here's the example that I want to focus on. This is real. It's a recordable injury, a cut right hand that required 17 stitches. And so knowing what that problem is, when I ask my diverse team, well, why or how, I think both of those questions are, why questions I think are useful. I learned this from Bob Latino, who I'm also eminently in debt to, forever in debt to, Mr. Latino, his wise offerings, and also his always availability for a beer. Thanks, Bob. Super fun. But why or how? So why questions often are looking at, well, why did a person make a decision that they did? How questions are more like, how would the hand get cut? So anyway, little nuances. But if you have a table saw operating and a hand moved onto that table saw, then that's going to result in the injury, right? And so what this allows, why I find a little bit of structure here useful, is that now I can say, okay, well, let's talk about that table saw operating. What's the purpose there? They're doing this, they're cutting a rabbet in a finished material because they're modifying it for an install in order to accommodate these steel corners. And why is that? Well, that's normal for the job. They planned for on-site installation. And now, well, why is that normal? Well, I run out of room here. Nobody on my team knows the answer. I don't know what the answer is. But notice here that this question mark opens up an opportunity to bring in what I learned about learning teams in Bob Edwards' class. Let's talk about normal work. Let's talk about how normal work in this case, most of the time, normal work doesn't result in your hand falling down onto, or putting your hand into a whirring table saw blade. But this time it did. And what's tragic about this is that in one of the messages that comes across a lot is, had we started here, maybe we never would have ended up here. Okay, well, but we did. Okay, we did. And so this is a way where we're looking backwards, but then it's also a way for us to utilize two different, what you see here, a cause and effect chart to map out the causes, but then also what you learned from one of the other community members about what to do when you run into a dead end. And why, different people are going to organize and find value in different methodologies. But for me, a chart like this is really useful in managing complexity because it allows me to put things in a place. And then I can also put them in a place in context with the other things that they interacted with. I'll go through just one more here. Why did the hand move onto the table saw blade? That's because the material collapsed down onto the blade while the hand was pushing the material, while at the time that there was no guard in place, and also when the saw blade was approximately three inches above the deck. Okay, so now you could say, well, geez, now you're pointing the finger because there was no guard in place. No, I'm not. I'm objectively stating a fact. There was a guard there, but that guard was removed. Now I can use what I've learned from Mr. Bob Nelms and say, geez, unless I understand this to the point, why would that guard be removed? Unless I understand this to the point that I would have acted the same way in the same circumstance, then I don't understand it. So this is one of those opportunities where you have to be really careful, because yes, you could use this to pin this on the worker. Or you dumbass, you took the guard off and that's why you got hurt. No, that's not going to be helpful. And all of us know that, especially in this community. What we got to do is understand the precursors, or as my buddy James Newman would say, the causal antecedents for why that guard was removed. There's a very good reason he couldn't make the cut with the guard in place. And that's because the piece of wood was 7 inches. It was too big for the guard, right? And he considered this to be an acceptable risk. Well, why? Okay, this is where we really can learn. If we can, now we have some barriers that we have to overcome here. This guy has to be willing to talk to us, and he has to be willing to play a role in collaborative learning environments. So I'm not saying this is easy. Facilitation is difficult, okay? But the process and the tools make it easier. It gives me capacity to manage this to the point where I can wring as much learning out of this as possible. It's not a guarantee, but it is absolutely better as a result. All right, so here, let's just do one more. I'm going to bring in one more community practice in, and that's the resiliency engineering. Okay, a router could make the cut, but there was no router on site, right? That's about why are you using a table saw in the first place? Sounds like a job for a router. And those of you who don't know this tooling, well, the router would be much safer because it's basically going to orient the work 90 degrees so that it's working flat, and it's going to keep that blade out of much more likely, less likely for the hand to go into the blade. Okay, well, why is there no router on the site? You know what? This opens up the door to engineering a better work environment, doesn't it? And it opens up the door for trying to identify ways not only of making this work environment safer, but all the work environments that these guys go to. These guys are a small shop. They're a small sub of a sub of a sub working on a great big project. In fact, a big building for Google, just a couple miles from where I am right now. You know, and guess what? If they can learn across their work sites to be better, and they can learn how to, to basically make their work safer and more resilient. And by the way, it probably, when you control safety, you're controlling quality, you're controlling schedule, because you're controlling variation. Variation controls a lot. It has a lot of, it goes in a lot of different directions, right? So in any case, what I wanted to do here is just take one example and then bring that into the discussion to show how all of these things really can come together. And, it brings up some questions such as, and not all these questions are actually answered at this point, such as what constitutes a cause? Hand collapsing onto the blade, is that a cause? Removing the table saw guard, is that a cause? Stock could not be installed as delivered, is that a cause? Saw blade height set to 3 inches, is that a cause? No pre-job hazard assessment, right? So, and the thing is that one of the things that I think us in the root cause analysis world are maybe not so good at is that we don't really agree on what's a cause and what isn't. And I've seen back in the day lots and lots of different I guess back and forth, thoughtful back and forth about defining what a cause is. It could be a lot of these different things, and I'm not going to say that any one of those is wrong. I'm just going to say though that when we abstract it up, the one commonality that we have here is that that all of these things are a part of this particular event. And if I were to roll back here to Bob's slide, this is what he's saying too. Even though he's starting from all the ingredients and working towards the event, whereas we do that exact opposite, which I don't think is neither here nor there. But the thing is that when we open up our definition of cause, and we're not focused on things like root causes per se, but we're focused more on just how did all of these things play a role, then I think that we're that's gonna take us a lot farther at being better facilitators. Okay, so one more thing that I want to point out, the subject is big, so I know that, and I'm running over a little bit, and I just appreciate the ability to sort of flesh this out. I love chocolate chip cookies, and we follow this recipe pretty much. We don't do it exactly the same, which is normal, right? It's normal for people to, hey, I manage my own variation. So we add oatmeal, we add cinnamon, we don't put nuts in, and all that kind of thing. But one of the things that I heard in a talk recently, oh, who was it? It was, I can't remember his name now. Darn it. Let me exit out of this for a second because he's right here. Where are you? Corey Pitzer. You guys know him. Come on. Corey Pitzer. It was a talk between Corey and Todd Conklin and Karen Study from Dow Chemical. And it was like, yeah, root cause analysis. He didn't say this, I'm paraphrasing, but it's good for engineering kinds of things, but it's not very good for that's in the world of safety. It's not so much a X caused Y, which then resulted in Z. Okay, well, that's not entirely true, because sometimes it is X caused Y resulted in Z. But like, in other words, if you have these ingredients and you do these things to them, you will result in cookies. But there's one ingredient missing from the list. There's one very important thing, and it's really hard to just put it on the list because it's not baking soda, it's not granulated sugar, it's not an egg, and it's also not a process such as beating the eggs one at a time. I'll give you guys a second, put it in the chat. What's missing from the list? It's very important and it's pertinent to Corey's comment. We'll see. I'm gonna look at the chat here. I'm refocusing.
We got one so far.
Human. Claire said human. Claire's not right. Oven, spatula. Oh, look at you guys go. Tanya, oven. I agree. Oven, spatula, human. Yeah, but that's not what I'm getting at, people. It's love. Did you know that, Dean?
I was going to say my grandmother would have said love, and I like that.
You got to put love in the cookies. You can't bake, and I'm not kidding. I'm not, Kathy. We're not allowed to bake under duress. You can only bake in a happy state of love in the kitchen. Well, it doesn't fit on here, right? Well, how does that love, is it important? Yes, it's important. It matters because it's whether do I sift the flour? Do I melt the butter? How long do I stir? Am I enjoying the process? All of that, you know, well, that doesn't fit into a nice, neat little cause box, does it? It's not really a knocked over the cup. It's more of a, you know, this kind of a thing, you know, so that's like culture, you know, a lot of these bigger concepts, but those do, okay, so the cause and effect chart is, you know, I acknowledge the limitations, but they certainly don't outweigh the usefulness. And so I stuffed those causes right on there. And I'll tell you just one more thing here. I'm wrapping this pretty quick. I want to jump back over here because I want to show you something. Where would we find like the version of love on this chart? Well, it starts right here in a cause like normal for the job, plan for on-site installation. You know, well, why is that? Well, now we're getting into the fabric of how these guys do business, the way in which they see the world and how that affects, that culture affects the way they plan for their jobs, right? That's where we're going to get to over here. And there's a place for that. Now, is it a nice, neat little box? No, doesn't matter. Not really, because guess what? A root cause analysis isn't a cause and effect chart. This is a means to an end. What this allows me to do is write a final report that makes sense. To do a report out to leadership so that they can learn what I learned, so that they can learn what the team learned, right? So, and check it out. Like, if you can, maybe a timeline helps you do that. Maybe a sequence of events helps you with that. Right. So maybe and maybe that helps you organize your thoughts. Right. Maybe a fishbone diagram helps you with that. I don't use fishbone very often, but some people may very well find useful. I'm not going to, who am I to say what somebody finds useful when they're in the world of complex investigation? That's why I'm saying you got to have these tools in your toolbox. You got to know how they work. You got to know where their weaknesses are. You got to know where their strengths are, and you got to be able to know when to apply them, when you need to apply them, if you're going to be a facilitator in this world. Okay. And so I will wrap my discussion now by basically saying to return to this common goal of sustainable, repeatable, successful outcomes in the presence of uncertainty. I should say increasing uncertainty. Well, guess what? That's what we all do. And that's where all of this comes together. And then our theoretical know-it-all is the person that is able to master all of these things at once as they move forward through time. Okay, so I think I'll conclude on that note. And I learned, this is fancy. I feel like it's look, it works too. If you guys want to link up with me, I really want to stay in touch through LinkedIn. I'm trying to be better. I think LinkedIn, I've gotten to the point where I've got a good community on LinkedIn. Like there's this group called the Safety Justice League. These guys are posting all kinds of awesome stuff all the time. There's another group of people, Safeopedia, who I'm doing a webinar for in a month. I think there's just so many people, and a lot of people from this community. Bob Latino, for instance, always posting, and his it's so much to learn out there. Like and by the way, I hide people. I don't know, people that aren't sharing value. then I just sort of weed them out of my network. And LinkedIn has become a really, like, it's an important part of my day. So link up. I'd love to know more. So now I'm 11 minutes over my mark, but maybe we can talk for a minute if people are still here.
Yeah, people are still here and all good, Brian. So thank you for sharing. And I just tested out the QR code and it worked like a charm. So thank you very much for giving an old dog a new trick. I appreciate
Nice.
that. And
What we want.
can you spare another 5 minutes or so for questions?
I got all the time in the world. Do you mind if I have my fidget spinner here in the form of my base, so I'm going to hold it.
Right. Well, if you let a couple notes rip, that's awesome. But
now
I will invite everyone to please feel free to unmute yourself or chat into the chat box. If you have questions or comments, please, let's just jump right in. And Brian, so thanks for the energy. Thanks for all the insights. And I love just that theme of, the present moment is our greatest opportunity. And luckily it's with us all the time, right? Mm-hmm. So that's brilliant. And I really like the thinking about, I like all the thinking, but that kind of that thing as a facilitator that we always need to be ready to unlearn and relearn really rapidly.
Oh, yeah.
And just know what's going on, because I know I kind of forget that from time to time. I get stuck in my own models. I get stuck looking at the way things were and my own view of the world. And sometimes it's not the easiest thing in the world to do.
No, I was working on a pipeline leak a few years ago, and these guys were going back and forth and back and forth. And I was like, yeah, I was in a forest fire moment, Then I thought, because you got the folks from the engineering firm that are working on the pipeline, you got the operators for the pipeline, and well, we should have known this, no, you shouldn't have known that, should have known this, etc. And finally, like the only way that I could get control of it, I was full improv, or at least the only way that I thought, is I literally slammed my fist on the table and I started dropping F-bombs. I don't do this, this isn't a way that I live in it, but you have to be somebody who the facilitation needs you to be at that moment. They all shut up at that point, and like that wasn't that I kind of needed them. It was like a cardiac arrest, it was in total, like the patient was going to die, so it was like I just needed to get their attention, and that was all I could do in the moment. But you got to be ready to go, and if you don't have these tools and this knowledge and these skills that the people at the community bring, well, then you're at a disadvantage, frankly,
Yeah, and I really like, if you could back up one slide, if you can do that when you're managing your base and the computer.
Oh,
I like how you even, so I think you did a good job with this in PowerPoint, and both the visual and how you tied all the community elements together in this way. I think that's like super interesting and very, very helpful. And I guess maybe it's not a simple question. How easy is it to start modeling the kind of where we want the future to go with the goal of having data-driven decision making?
Yeah, data-driven. Well, I mean, I don't. What I want to say is it depends It depends. Here, let's do this. Let's back up a couple more slides.
Okay.
I'm going to go back to here. Oh gosh, this slide. I love this, but it's also kind of a wreck. It depends. Let's just stay at the top headings here. It's easier. You don't need to do it in an obvious quadrant. It's easier to do it here and complicated. All that does is really just defining and organizing, which is which a lot of people are really good at. You just have to kind of head down and focus, maybe a little bit of learning, and it would be a little easier to do it here. Over here is a little trickier because so I maybe relying on my own experiences is best. So our company, we do two different things, but they're very different things. We do training, consulting, that kind of thing, and that's kind of my world. And then we build software, like you saw that COSLink software. That is not my world, and is totally different. And so the world that I'm in at Sologic, we're helping to design training classes and writing presentations and things like this, is an area that is more built out. Okay, and now I'm trying to push the envelope a little bit. So I've pushed from complicated into complex because I think there's opportunities to learn in those margins. Okay, but the world of software development, John and his team, the things that those guys are working on, it's different. It's a different world altogether. And like when you start trying to bring things to the table, like, well, we discussed artificial intelligence, and can the computer not only interpret events from respect to cause and effect, but also can it predict events? Then that sort of a task becomes much more difficult. So that's why I said it depends, and it kind of depends on the domain in which your project or your world is, where that actually is. So that's maybe not very satisfying, but I think that's the best I can do.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. And while we're pausing there to see if there are any other questions, Jessica posted in the chat box a couple links for upcoming webinars. So those are in there for everybody. You can take a look at that. In November, we have Tom Moriarty, who's going to talk about the productive leadership model. And then skipping December because chock full of holidays and travel and whatever else the whole world is doing in December. And then we're back in January with Gene Bellinger, who's going to talk about his insights and experience from looking at models and how things connect and don't connect and interconnect over the past 45 years. So that's going to be super interesting too.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah, it is. And I think we'll all find that one fun. Gene was with us for about most of your presentation, Brian, but he had to drop for something, but he was super intrigued. And Jessica, also, thank you for posting about accepting abstracts for the 2022 annual conference. Brian, thanks for highlighting that one earlier too, because it will be a great conference, and just absolutely looking for, anyone, if you're out there thinking about how you can contribute to this learning, this is your perfect opportunity to contribute via a presentation or discussion at the conference. It'll be a great opportunity. The link is in the chat box. And anybody, if you have questions about, I'll put my email address in there too. If you have questions about a topic, how it might fit, how you feel about presenting, anything about the conference, just let me know, because I'm happy to help. It'll be a great opportunity.
Yeah. So Dean, I pulled this up just because James Newman, I saw a comment. One of the things I learned from the awesome Tony Mushara and Ron Ferris and Jim Marinas, these guys are releasing an article called Critical Steps, and I borrowed this with permission from those guys about mapping out critical steps in a process that can help you determine what steps absolutely must not fail. But then James has got this really cool thing called a RIC score, like how this is conceptual, like how do you know that this is a red step, for instance, versus this is a green step? Well, James has done a lot of great work in terms of coming up with scoring those steps. And then that relates back to your question about, how do you know, how can you best handle a situation, especially if you're in this sort of complex quadrant like this, Yeah,
I love that. And I know James, thanks for adding that in the chat box and for joining us too. So my question for both of you is that RIC score, is that absolute or is that gut feel?
Oh my gosh. So I'm gonna have to let James speak to that.
That's super intriguing.
It's both.
Hey guys.
Hey.
I love this. I appreciate you doing this morning. And I will tell you, there's a lot to RIC score, but in the 30-second thing, it's risk, impact, and complexity. For the risk is the danger to those doing the job. The impact is how it can affect other people outside of the job or equipment. And then complexity is, what kind of qualifications do you need to do this successfully? How many different groups are involved in this? And what we've been doing, what I've been working with the Department of Energy on the Berkeley lab is sorting this out with their safety manager. And what we're doing is we're making these things finite. So they're black and white. They're yes, no questions. Like, are you using a ladder? Yes, no. And then that brings you to another question. You know, if it's a no, it just goes right to a whole nother thing. But it's basically through yes, no questions, a planner can determine the RIC score for any job coming up. Excuse me. And what you do with that number, there's a whole bunch of different things you could do with that number. But one of them is to predict how, I'm going to say, the predictability of failure, what that might look like. And you can actually develop a leading indicator out of this number. So there's my 30 seconds of, I already submitted an abstract to you guys. Hopefully it's interesting enough to want to know more.
Yeah, I saw that. And James, thank you so much for that flyby, because this is just super powerful. So thank you.
Sure. You're welcome. Yeah, love it. And thanks for sharing it, Brian.
Yeah. Oh, guys, I could just do this all day.
Well, unfortunately,
Okay.
we are out of runway.
Okay, we'll call it a day. Good.
Yeah, but Brian, as
buddy.
ever, I'm like so appreciative of time and insights and just leading this discussion in a just great, energetic way. So thank you.
No problem. I love it. I love the opportunity, and I really appreciate it too. So I'm always happy to contribute, and I hope everybody has a great day.
Yeah, and everybody, if you haven't already hit the QR code to connect with Brian, I encourage you to do that, and reach out to me as you have questions or comments about the conference in June or about our monthly webinar series. So thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.
Take care.